Hello friends, in part 1 we mapped what was signed and what it cost, $37 billion a year. In part 2 we asked who actually had the authority to make those deals and whether Canadians were ever asked. Now let's look at the big question and the treaties map. Today we follow the money one more layer down. What happened when the promises went to court and what has that cost provinces, companies and you and me? Because here is the part most people don't know. The biggest financial obligation in this file weren't in the original treaties at all. They were created by judges. Let's get into it. Here is a price tag of court-created obligation, $34 billion for Trans Mountain Pipeline total, $500 million for Marshall Fishery buyback issue, and the $16 billion Site C Dam which is in Treaty 8 litigation related in BC. Here are the 5 decisions that rewrote the obligation in Canada. In R versus Sparrow 1990, the first Supreme Court test of Section 35, Musqueam Nation challenged a federal fisheries restriction. The court ruled the government can limit Aboriginal rights, but only it can justify the infringement, if it can. So the burden of proof is on the Crown. That test still governs every resorts decision in Canada today. In R versus Marshall 1999, Supreme Court ruled that Mi'kmaq people in Maritimes hold a treaty rights to earn a moderate livelihood from fishing, hunting and gathering, and Atlantic fishery was never the same. Ottawa spent over $500 million buying back commercial licenses to make room for that. That was just the entry cost. In Haida Nation versus British Columbia 2004 decision, this one definitely changed how every project in Canada gets approved. The court ruled government must consult with Indigenous nations before any decision that could affect their rights, even before those rights are proven in court. You don't wait for a ruling. In this case, you have to consult first. Every environmental review, every resource permit, every pipeline approval now runs through that filter. And Tsilhqot'in Nations versus British Columbia 2014 case, the Supreme Court declared Aboriginal title, not just rights, title, over roughly 1,900 square kilometers in central BC. First time ever, the title means the nations controls the land. Crown must get consent, not just consult. Of course, there is a big difference in those two words. That word consent is a fulcrum of every resource debate in this country right now. In Daniels versus Canada, which is a 2016 decision of SEC, the Supreme Court ruled that Métis and non-status Indians are constitutionally Indians under Section 9124, meaning federal responsibility. Before Daniels, provinces were absorbing many of those costs, but after Daniels, Ottawa owns the file, and thus the financial implications are still being calculated. Here is an overview of what the duty to consult actually cost and what it means in reality. The process is company proposes a project, provinces issue permits, federal review goes on, and then duty to consult Indigenous nations. Nations approve, oppose, or negotiate IBA. Possible court challenge or not. Project proceeds delayed or cancelled. So these are the framework that companies have to navigate through right now. In case of the Trans Mountain Pipeline saga expansion, twinning an existing line from Edmonton to Burnaby was originally a private project. It went through 4 separate federal consultation rounds and 2 federal Court of Appeal rulings finding consultation was inadequate. The federal government then purchased the entire pipeline for $4.4 billion in 2018, in part to control the consultation risk. Total project cost by completion was approximately $34 billion. Consultation process added years and billions. Obviously, those were paid by the taxpayers. The Ring of Fire, chromite deposits in northern Ontario, estimated value in hundreds of billions. 24 First Nations with overlapping interest. The province has committed over $1 billion in infrastructure spending just to reach a framework. The mines have not opened. The project has been inadequately consulted, negotiated, whatever you call it, for over 15 years. And Site C Dam in British Columbia is $16 billion hydro project on the Peace River inside the Treaty 8 territory in British Columbia. Now, BC Hydro completed its consultation, but the Treaty 8 nations argue their constitutionality protected rights to hunt, fish, and trap is being permanently impaired. So litigation on that front is continuing, and the dam has been slowly built. The legal exposure is unresolved. There are not edge cases. They are the template of how this type of major projects proceeds. Any major resource project in Canada now carries a consultation cost, legal fees, process delays, capacity funding, and potential compensation, and of course hiring those big consulting firms for their advice. That simply did not exist before 2004. Here is a graphical view of what each province actually pays. So obviously there is no national standard. Each provinces pay based on their own relationship with the First Nation community and the business community and the party in power. So these are all patch-up job, and that runs from $100 million endowment for British Columbia's to billions of dollars in Ontario, Alberta, Quebec. So these are all big money issue, and of course public have no idea and the details of how that's affecting them, their pocketbook. Now let's look at the resource revenue sharing, where the money flows. That will give us a little bit better picture. The Nisga's final agreement, BC's first modern treaty, which was signed in 1999, the Nisga'a received $190 million, approximately 8% of the salmon harvest, and forest licenses worth tens of millions of dollars annually. It was the first Canadian treaty to explicitly include resource revenue sharing. Obviously, again, those were not approved by the individual taxpayers or the voters. The Tsilhqot'in, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, Tsilhqot'in Agreement in the Northwest Territories, 2003, the Tsilhqot'in First Nation gained title to about 39,000 square kilometers of land and a share of resource royalties from development within the area. Federal government retains a royalty but shares a portion through negotiated formula that public rarely sees, at least I don't know about it. Then there is the 1913 Natural Resources Transfer Agreement, an agreement most Canadians have never heard of, at least I didn't know myself. When the Prairie provinces joined Confederation, Ottawa controlled their natural resources. In 1930, that agreement control was transferred to Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba. First Nations who were not party to that deal, the oil, gas, and potash that generate provincial royalties today, were transferred without Indigenous consent. So that gap is the legal basis for revenue sharing claims still working through the courts right now. There is no national resource revenue sharing formula, as I noted. There is no legislation setting a percentage. There is a patchwork of negotiated agreement, private contracts, and litigation, and the gap between the most generous deal and the list is quite significant. Now, here is the proponents' point of view, what they are saying, and it's quite, I guess, self-explanatory. Their positions are well noted and published, I guess, promoted by all the, I guess, their related organization. So that's nothing new. And the critics, their positions are also well known, and obviously they have a solid argument too. And so we want to kind of raise both sides their position to be fair to both sides. Now let's look at the UNDRIP and what comes next. In June 2021, Canada passed the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Implementation Act. UNDRIP requires a Crown to obtain free, prior, and informed consent before approving projects that affect Indigenous land and resources. British Columbia also passed a similar act based on the UN Declaration rights. The government says the UNDRIP does not create a veto. Legal scholars disagree, and also in recent British Columbia Court of Appeal decision also put that whole question into limbo, and Supreme Court of Canada hasn't really taken up that case yet, so that matter is yet to come. But what is certain is that there is a cost to this uncertainty, which can measure in financing rates, longer timeline to complete any project, and the projects that never gets built. So stay tuned on that, and I may do a supplementary episode on the UNDRIP issue only because that affects the title of a lot of British Columbian land, and people are concerned about their titles, and that may even affect the titles across Canada. So stay tuned for that. So here is a look at the winners and losers that I like to call. As you probably noticed in our all episode, we like to always have a ledger to show who are the winners, who are the losers, and this is not an exceptional situation. So let's look at who are the winners. Obviously, First Nations with modern treaties, they're the winners. Legal sectors, of course, litigation is a big growing industry, especially the constitutional and Aboriginal rights related law firms are raking big bucks. Nations near major resource projects, obviously, they have a right to exploit the maximum gain they can from their existing rights. Federal government, short term, of course, they can just kind of describe to the voting public the narratives that they love to use. On the other hand, the losers are all Canadian taxpayers, regardless of whatever your political views are. We know that number estimated from 37 billion plus Trans Mountain cost that about billions that we already mentioned, and the Ring of Fire commitments. So collectively, taxpayers are on the hook for it. And if the taxpayers had those money available to them, they could buy more things and do whatever they wish to do. Anyway, reserve sectors, investors are also losers. Legal uncertainty, higher capital cost, project shelved, and nations without modern treaties still under Indian Act. They have limited revenue sharing access. So many of the First Nation who are not subject to the modern treaties are also losers in this case because they are not getting a fair share that others are getting. And also the future governments, UNDRIP consent standard undefined is open-ended liability, and the cost, who knows where it ends up to be. So here is where we are after 3 episodes. Just to recap, the British government made the original deals. Canadian politicians inherited them. In 1982, a constitutional amendment locked them in without public vote or referendum. Courts then took those 14 words in the Constitution and built an entire legal ecosystem on top of them. Duty to consult, Aboriginal title, consent requirements, and expanding categories of who qualifies. Provinces are writing checks without a national framework telling them how much. Companies are cutting equity deals in private. The federal government bought a $34 billion pipeline, partly to manage legal risk, and 2021 federal law has introduced a standard consent that courts will be defining for next generation. None of this is in original treaties. The $37 billion annual bill is not what was negotiated in the 1700s and 1800s. It is what 70 years of legislation, constitutional amendments, and court decision have built on top of those original agreements. I'm not telling you what to think. Rather, I'm just simply telling you what it cost and who decides and what courts have done with the 14 words in the Constitution. Because this is your money, my money, your constitutional framework, and the right that all of us have, and right for us to understand the full picture. If you made it through all three parts, I know that it's a boring, dry subject. You're not coming to YouTube to listen to this. Thank you. And drop your comments. What do you think? Are you okay with your money to be given away in the name of making agreement deals or whatever you call? You and I should have a right to say what kind of deal we agree or we don't agree, but we were never asked. So I'd like to know your comments. What do you think? Because it's important that we all hear each other's point of view. Thank you. Please stay tuned for episode 4. That will be coming the following week. Thank you.